BRICS foreign ministers have wrapped up 2 days of talks in Rio. The overall BRICS meeting concluded without the 20 participating countries reaching a joint communique, but backing a final declaration by the chair, Brazil, after China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met one-on-one with his Brazilian counterpart, as both nations navigate the effects of sweeping U.S. tariffs. From Rio now on the importance of this BRICS foreign ministers meeting, I'm joined by Anthony Chan. He is a former chief economist at J.P. Chase. Welcome back to the program. Anthony, what are the key economic themes to emerge from this foreign ministers meeting, would you say?
Well, Mike, what you heard and what you see is that we are living in very challenging times where we're moving away from multilateralism towards unilateralism. And clearly the meeting wants to bring us back to multilateralism. But at the same time, the countries know that they have to work with the United States. So it's a very sensitive topic. And so that's why in the communique, you don't hear the United States coming up or even named. But clearly, when you look at the messaging and when you listen to the things that were discussed at the meetings, there's clearly disappointment that somehow these U.S. tariffs are impacting the rest of the world, including the global South.
And you talked about unilateralism versus what we're seeing here. In fact, we're seeing an expansion. I mean, there's more BRICS members. How does that impact the bloc's economic influence globally, do you think?
I'm glad you asked that question, Mike, because what we're seeing this year and recently is that there are more members as part of the BRICS countries. And when you have more members, it actually increases the power of the group. But on the downside is that it's a lot more challenging to reach a consensus, especially if they're trying to make a message or deliver a message that they're upset about the tariffs, while many of these countries may be in the midst of negotiations with the United States. And so they certainly don't want to poison the waters or make things more challenging. But again, the bottom line, more countries, more challenging to reach a consensus.
And one of the other things we're seeing is this growing talk about moving away from the U.S. dollar when it comes to trade. Are BRICS countries making any progress on that front?
Again, that's a big challenge for the BRIC countries because they have the underlying threat that somehow if they move away completely from the dollar, there's that threat of 100% tariff from the United States. So again, no surprise that was not really top front and center at these meetings. What they want to do is probably move away slightly from the dollar, but to replace the dollar, it's probably a non-starter at this time.
And what are we seeing in terms of tariffs when we look at countries trying to maybe boost their own trade and investment among member nations?
Oh, I think you're going to see a lot more of that. You saw President Xi traveling to many of the Asian countries to try to get more trade. You're going to see a lot more excitement in countries like India and Latin America and Brazil as they start to, again, trade within themselves. In fact, China has already done that. The United States is the third largest trading partner for China. It's no longer the number one or the number two country. And many of these other BRIC countries are going to do the same thing. They're going to try to grow the trade among themselves as opposed to focusing on a country that they view as having somewhat higher risk.
And Anthony, tease that out for us, because I remember the first Trump administration with the tariffs. We saw, I mean, we've interviewed a number of farmers in Iowa. I mean, they had such a robust soybeans business with China. And then all of a sudden it was kind of sealed off and they started to get their soybeans from Brazil. I mean, are there going to be reverse effects? Trump's trying to move the needle in one direction, but may it go in another direction altogether?
That's right. What you're seeing is that since the Trump first administration, we got a taste of those tariffs. These countries realized that meant that there is some risk. So what you've seen is many of these countries slowly and gradually been trying to seek alternative markets for their products. In fact, what you see is the United States and China, when you look at the amount of exports that China sends to the United States from the first administration to now, it's dropped sharply. So, and many of these countries are following that same business model to trade more among themselves, less with the United States, until they can really feel comfortable that there is not as much risk. But so far, with these trade negotiations and these tariffs that have been proposed, they're getting the message that there is risk. And so they are definitely going to diversify and to increase trade among themselves. And that's even more so with regard to agriculture, because you heard at these meetings that they really focused heavily on agricultural or food security among those countries.
And Anthony, as the host, what economic priorities did Brazil bring to the table, do you think?
Well, I think Brazil brings a very robust and high agricultural output. We know that in countries like Africa, food security is a real serious issue. But you have Brazil increasing the amount of food that they produce. That means they will have food for Africa. They'll have food for China, and that unfortunately is to the detriment of the United States, that now will have to look for markets. And to the extent that these countries, which again, it has more than half of the population in the world, are trying to diversify and trade more with themselves, it puts the United States on the back foot.
And one final question before we let you go. How do you see the role of BRICS evolving as we look down the road the next 5 to 10 years? As you mentioned, in some ways it's unwieldy because there's a lot more members, but what kind of impact can they have?
Oh, there's no question, Mike, that they're going to grow in impact. Right now, what you're seeing in these meetings, and by the way, they have another one coming up in July in Rio, is sort of growing pains. But as soon as these countries basically work through these conflicts, and they will, the power of these BRIC nations will grow, and they will command greater respect and greater influence within the world, especially as they solidify those trading relationships with each other.
Anthony, always great to see you. Love your insights. Thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure.